It was a still, whispering night on Maple Grove Farm, the kind of night where the stars flickered like distant candles, and the moon hung low, casting a silver glow across the fields. The air was thick with the sweet scent of hay, and the distant rustle of leaves danced in the cool breeze. But underneath this serene facade, trouble was brewing. Inside the old barn, Farmer Bill, a sturdy man weathered by years of toil, was silently awake. He could hear the soft snoring of Peanut, his old hound, sprawled comfortably in his corner. But something was different tonight. The air crackled with an electric tension, and an unsettling chill raced down Bill's spine. Bill was known for his fierce loyalty to his land, having inherited the farm from his father. His hands bore the scars of hard work, and his heart was intertwined with every blade of grass, every rusted nail. He had spent half a lifetime fighting the elements, nurturing his crops and keeping his animals safe. He had seen storms smile and frown, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like a storm was brewing in a different way. Just then a sound cut through the night. A muted thump. Bill's heart leapt into his throat. He strained his ears, listening. The sound came again, closer now. It was a heavy footfall coupled with the unmistakable sound of metal scraping. Someone was in his barn. Bill's heart raced. Unannounced visitors were rare in Maple Grove, especially in the dead of night. Stealthily, he slid from his cot, trying not to wake Peanut. He crept toward the barn door, the wood creaking softly under his weight, each groan echoing the tension tightening in his chest. Peeking through the chinks in the barn's wooden slats, he squinted into the shadows. There were figures, 3 of them, whispering, their movements jerky and anxious as they hoisted heavy sacks onto their shoulders. Intruders. Panic surged through Bill, stark and bitter. His farming reactor brain kicked and he needed a plan. He dashed back into the barn, eyes darting for something in the dim light. There was an old pitchfork, rusty and worn, tucked behind a half-broken crate. He grasped it tightly. It was all he had in this moment. Bill clutched the pitchfork, steadfast as a mountain, and bounded toward the back door. Before he reached it, he paused, hearing snippets of whispered conversation. "Get the equipment," one voice urged, low with urgency. A shiver shot through him. They were here to steal. Stealing from a man who harvested the earth while they lurked in the shadows, plotting their misdeeds. Just maybe he could turn the tables. With a wave of determination, Bill crept back into the shadows of the barn, positioning himself behind a large stack of hay bales. From here, he could see the intruders moving about, rummaging through his tools, his life's work. Each clang of metal against metal felt like a hammer striking his heart. Bill's mind whirred with a plan as he glanced at the barn. It was his sanctuary, a place he had built, not just by hand, but with love, sweat, and resilience. The intruders didn't belong here, but he wouldn't let fear consume him. Instead, he would use his knowledge to thwart them. With a deep breath, he grabbed his flashlight, flicked it on, and aimed it at a corner where he had stored old tires. They were dilapidated but sturdy. A flash of an idea gripped him. If he could lure them away, he might just have a chance. He felt the adrenaline pulse through his veins as he shouted, "Hey!" His voice boomed off the barn walls, powerful and commanding. The intruders froze, eyes wide, surprise painting their faces. In a heartbeat, he hurled the flashlight across the barn. It skidded across the floor, the beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes spiraling through the air like a ghostly cloud. The intruders turned, distraction flickering in their eyes, and Bill seized the moment. With a forceful shove, he kicked a stack of old tires towards them. They rolled with a deafening crash. Chaos erupted as one intruder tripped, the others stumbling backward, confusion spilling across their features. Bill roared, brandishing the pitchfork like a knight wielding a sword, each movement infused with righteous anger. The intruders, momentarily flustered, found their footing and scrambled for the exit. The tension electrified the air as fear mingled with shock, a mixture that catalyzed their instinct to flee. But Bill pressed on, his voice unwavering. "You think you can come here, take what's mine, and walk away?" Each word dripped with fierce purpose, resonating deep within him. In the dim light, he could see their faces shift from surprise to realization. They began retreating, stepping back onto the cold earth outside. One of them glanced at Bill, eyes narrowed, as if evaluating whether to fight or run. Bill stood firm, embodying every ounce of determination he could summon. Just as they reached the barn door, Peanut, fully aware of the intruder's presence, erupted into a vigorous bark, a mighty guardian at Bill's side. The sound was as fierce as thunder. It rumbled through the night, a signal of unity between man and dog, an unwavering force against the intruders. With the combination of Bill's fierce stance and Peanut's growling warning, the intruders turned tail and sprinted into the darkness, their forms dissolving into the shadows, leaving behind only confusion and scattered tools on the barn floor. Bill took a moment, breathing deeply, letting the adrenaline ebb away. He leaned heavily on the pitchfork, heart pounding as he processed what had just happened. The sound of the intruder's footsteps faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence that resonated deeply. "Guess they didn't expect an old farmer to put up a fight," he murmured, his lips curling into a wry smile. He walked back inside the barn, looking around at the remnants of the chaos. Peanut trotted up to him, panting but proud. Bill knelt down, ruffling the dog's ears with gratitude. But the adrenaline was fading, and with it came a wave of exhaustion, weighed down by the unsettling knowledge that there were those willing to prey upon the innocent. He couldn't shake the unease that settled deep in his gut. The invaders were gone for now, but what if they returned? What if they were watching, plotting their next move? Bill's protective instincts ignited anew. He knew he needed to fortify not just his barn but his entire home. So he set to work, gathering wood and tools, fortifying the doors and windows, creating barriers to keep out those who lurked in the shadows. The next few days were a blur of activity. He found himself drawing strength from the mundane routine of a farmer's life. He milked the cows, tended to the crops, and repaired his fences. Each task restored his spirit and reaffirmed his commitment to safety. With each nail driven and every lock installed, he felt like a fortress rising from the earth. But Bill also knew that some preparation was more than physical. He began to research, thumbing through old books and articles about home security, studying how to better protect the ones he loved and the land he cherished. Each page was like stepping into a realm of knowledge, filled with stories of others who had faced similar threats, overcoming them with resilience and strategy. He learned about community bonds, about alerting neighbors, about forming a pact of protection. His conversations with the local farmers shifted too, as the whispers of his encounter began to travel through the tight-knit community. The once quiet nights were filled with talk of safety. Neighbors checked in with each other, ensuring everyone was vigilant and prepared. Farmer Bill was no longer just protecting his own. He'd become a beacon of courage, rallying the farmers around him to unite. Weeks passed, and the sense of solidarity spread like wildfire, strengthening each other in ways that went beyond physical barriers. They shared precautionary tales over coffee at the diner, banded together for occasional night patrols. Bill realized that his battle made them all stronger, forging a community where they had each other's backs. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Bill stepped outside to admire the work the community had put into safeguarding each farm. The barn stood tall, fortified, and ready. The fields glimmered golden, waving gently in the evening breeze, embodying the resilience of nature itself. But Bill still couldn't shake the feeling that the intruders would return, that someday they would test the walls he had built. That night, he kept watch, determined to protect the heart of his home. He sat on the porch with Peanut by his side, the world falling into a tranquil hush. Hours passed, the night stretching around him like a soft blanket, but the stillness was interrupted by a snap like a twig breaking underfoot. Alert, Bill's heart thumped again, adrenaline flooding through him. He glanced at Peanut, who had perked up as if sensing the disturbance. Slowly, he rose to his feet. He walked to the edge of the porch, peering into the darkness beyond. Shadows danced around the edges of the barn. He felt that familiar sting of adrenaline coursing through him, his body molding back into the warrior he had been that fateful night. Equipped with a flashlight and a new sense of community-driven strength, he stepped into the shadows, ready to confront whatever was lurking there. Whatever it was, intruder or beast, Bill stood resolutely, prepared to protect his home, family, and land. He was not just a farmer anymore. He was a guardian, a steward of not just land but of unity, of resilience, of spirit. The night was alive, and so was he, fear transformed into strength. For every challenge faced, every heart that beat in fear, there was a fire ignited, and in the face of uncertainty, Farmer Bill would rise unwavering, defending what was his to the very end. The stillness of the night shattered. A loud crash echoed through Maple Creek, jolting Farmer James out of a restless sleep. Heart pounding like a drum, he shot up, adrenaline coursing through him. That sound came from the barn, the very heart of his land, a sanctuary for his animals and his livelihood. James took a moment to gather himself, pushing aside the fog of sleep. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting eerie shadows that crept across the wooden floor. Peanut, his loyal old hound, stirred beside him, ears perked, low growls rumbling in his chest. The alarm bells in James's head were ringing loud and clear. Someone was in the barn. He slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Peanut, who was now wide awake, tension racking his body. James crept to the window and peeked out, the cool night air whispering against his skin. But all he could see were the faint outlines of the barn and the silhouette of his crops swaying quietly under the stars. A second crash sent shivers down his spine, snapping him back to reality. Time was of the essence. He had spent his entire life loving this land, nurturing every inch of it. His father had taught him that nothing was more valuable than this farm. And now, intruders threatened everything he held dear. His heart raced as he quietly moved to the back of the house, grabbing the sturdy shovel leaning against the porch railing. It wasn't much, but it was something. He peered into the darkened barnyard, eyes straining to catch a glimpse of the invaders. Shadows danced erratically before him, a silent waltz of deceit and danger. As he approached the barn, he could hear voices, low murmurs mixing with the sound of metal clanking against metal. They weren't here just to peek in, they were here with intent. With a deep breath, James pressed himself against the side of the barn, feeling the weathered wood beneath his hands. He needed a plan. His mind raced through options. Confront them? No, that would be reckless. He couldn't take on 3 intruders alone without a proper strategy. But could he outsmart them? He thought back to stories he'd heard as a child, how thieves often fell into their own traps through their arrogance. This was a place where hard work was a way of life. Often it took more than muscle to defend it. It took wit, cunning, and above all, knowledge of the land. Then inspiration struck. He quietly turned and made his way to the rear of the barn, where an old water barrel lay tipped over, forgotten and empty. Just beyond it, a pile of loose hay sat, ripe for the picking. With every ounce of stealth he could muster, he began to stack the loose hay around the barrel, forming a barrier that could serve a dual purpose, a hiding spot and an obstacle. Each hay bale he moved served as a reminder of how he'd always fought for every inch of this land. It was sacred to him. As he worked quietly, the voices grew nearer. "Grab the tools. We don't have all night," one intruder barked, their impatience fraying the edges of fear in James's gut. Peanut's low growl intensified. He could sense the tension hanging thick in the air. The intruders were nearing the back of the barn. They had to be stopped. Every ounce of James's being screamed that he had to protect what was his. Just as he finished hiding behind the hay, he caught a glimpse of the intruders. 3 men, rugged and unkempt, shoving tools into bags, treating the barn like a grocery store, as if their actions had no consequences. Anger flared in James's chest. This was not a game. James's mind whirred as he listened. It was clear they had no real plan. They were simply acting on impulse. A flicker of hope ignited in him. If he played his cards right, he could turn their chaos against them. He shouted, projecting his voice with the authority he had learned over years of commanding the land. He jumped from behind the hay bales, shovel in hand, brandishing it like a sword. Their heads snapped toward him, surprise morphing their faces. The largest one took a step back, eyes wide as they gauged the situation. He demanded, bravado masking his surprise. "I'm the man who owns this farm, and you've made a grave mistake," James said, his voice steady. He couldn't allow them to see fear. This was a battle of wills now. They started to inch backward, confusion flipping to hesitation. The tension crackled in the air around them. James caught sight of their dilapidated pickup idling in the distance, lights dim like fading spirits. He knew then how desperately they needed to escape. With a sudden surge of confidence, James lunged forward, raising the shovel. "Get out!" They stumbled backward in alarm. James pressed his advantage, momentarily surprised at the strength of his own fearlessness. But then he began to channel that energy into a plan. The barn was his domain. He knew it like the back of his hand. "Let's see how tough they are without their precious tools," he thought, scanning the ground. His eyes landed on the pile of tools they had hastily tossed aside, forgotten in their chaotic greed. One by one, he began to kick them toward the far side of the barn, sending them scattering into the shadows, making it hard for them to spot their loot while keeping them near the exit. With each clang of metal hitting the ground, the intruders grew increasingly frustrated, their bravado slipping away like water through their fingers. James could see their fear beginning to mingle with impatience, the bravado fading in light of uncertainty. It struck him, the longer they hung around, the more likelihood they would take reckless chances. He also couldn't keep this up forever. He needed to drive them out, but also to stall time was his ally. James glanced to the left toward the old hayloft. If he could get them to look that way, he might be able to create a distraction. "You want to take my tools. Why would you even want them?" he yelled, gesturing wildly. The intruders exchanged glances, curiosity bubbling just below the surface. They were clearly wavering, and James sensed a golden opportunity. He turned suddenly, sprinting towards the back of the barn, praying they would follow. Footsteps pounded behind him, heavier and more frantic than before. James was in their heads now. He could feel their hesitation turn to desperation. He turned sharply, throwing a few loose tools towards the hayloft to create a ruckus. The noise turned into a cacophony, echoing through the barn. Feeling emboldened, he grabbed the low-hanging lantern swinging overhead and flicked it on. The amber light burst into life, illuminating the chaos of the barn, the hay bales rising like monsters in the shadows, and the remnants of the intruders' hastily discarded plans scattered around. James dashed toward the doors, the unmistakable sound of feet thundering behind him. The smell of sweat and panic was palpable. He knew he had to make his final stand. He took a breath, prepared to flip the switch. Just as he reached the door, he spun around and faced them, wrenching open the barn door wide. The night air poured in like a wave, light spilling out into the darkness. "This is it," he thought. The intruders froze, chests heaving, as they stood framed in silhouette against the darkened landscape behind them. Panic gripped their faces. The uncertainty twisted around them like fog. James could see the fear. He could taste it in the air. Without another word, they scrambled back, fear overtaking their bravado, retreating into the night. They stumbled over their own feet, the weight of their stolen tools dragging them back. They darted toward their pickup, the last remnants of their pride trailing behind them as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving only echoes of chaos in their wake. James stood there, the night air still and heavy. His heart hammered in his chest, and he felt the ground beneath him steady again. Exhaustion washed over him, but it was tinged with triumph. He had protected what was his. He had fought back and won. Peanut bounded up to him, tail wagging, barking with joy. James knelt and hugged the old hound, palpable relief washing over him. "Good boy, Peanut." In that night he found more than just protection of his land. He discovered a strength he hadn't known he possessed, the power of resolve mixed with the heart of a farmer who wouldn't let fear steal his dream. Yet, as the sun rose over Maple Creek the next morning, James knew that vigilance was still required. He looked out over his fields, still peaceful but now fortified with purpose. The intruders might have fled tonight, but they wouldn't be gone forever. James was ready. He was a farmer, he was a protector. He would stand tall against any storm life dared to throw his way. And with each dawn, as the sun spilled warmth across the land, he reaffirmed his commitment to fight for everything he cherished. Because this was more than just a farm. This was home. This was life. This was a legacy, and he would fight for every precious inch of it until his last breath. The chilling sound of splintering wood sliced through the night air, a sharp contrast to the tranquil silence that usually wrapped around Maple Creek Farm. Farmer Tom jolted awake, his heart racing, instincts screaming that something was terribly wrong. He pushed aside the faded quilt draped over his bed, the cold wooden floor sending a shiver through his feet as he slipped out. The quiet night was deceptive. Beneath it lay a brewing storm of chaos. Unlike other nights filled with the soft sounds of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves, tonight was different. Tonight, the moon hung high, casting an eerie glow over his cherished barn. Peanut, his loyal hound, sniffed the air, ears perked, muscles tense. Tom could feel the unsaid anxiety between them. Over the years, they had built an unbreakable bond, instinctively understanding when trouble loomed. They shared a silent agreement, a fire igniting in Tom's belly. Tonight was about protecting what was his. Tom crept toward the window, every creak of the floorboard sounding like thunder in the stillness. He peered out into the barnyard, his breath hitching. Shadows moved in the barn, figures hunched over hastily, rummaging through his tools, his livelihood. Intruders. His mind raced. These weren't just random burglars looking for a quick score. They were thieves, determined to plunder everything he had worked so hard to build. Anger coursed through him like liquid fire. He wouldn't let them take what was his, not without a fight. With quick, steady breaths, Tom made his way back to the small kitchen, adrenaline sharpening his senses. He grabbed the old, rusty garden hoe from the wall, an unlikely weapon, but it would have to do. It felt heavy in his hands, but as he turned it over, memories flooded back. The long hours spent toiling in the soil, creating a home from nothing but dreams. This was his land, his home. "Stay close, Peanut," he whispered, and the dog nodded, instincts kicking into high gear as he settled low to the ground, ready to defend. Huddled behind a stack of straw bales, Tom peered inside the barn. The intruders, 3 men in dark clothing, moved swiftly, tossing tools into burlap sacks, their whispers a mix of urgency and laughter. It was brazen, reckless. They had no idea the fight they were about to face. At that moment, Tom recalled the stories his father told him about bandits from long ago. By nature, thieves were impulsive. They never anticipated resistance. Seizing on that, Tom crafted a plan, a way to use the intruders' own arrogance against them. He quietly made his way to the far side of the barn, heart thundering but mind focused. The barn was a maze of memories, each board, every nail imbued with his family's legacy. A thick, old rope lay coiled in a corner, and an idea struck him. He quickly tied one end to an old post, and with the other end he fashioned a makeshift tripwire across the entrance to the barn. With skilled movements, he secured it just high enough to catch a foot without them noticing. It was simple but effective, a small victory against their recklessness. As he worked, the murmurings of the intruders grew louder, a false sense of security enveloping them. "Hurry up! Grab those shears, we can sell them for good money," one of them urged. Anger boiled just beneath Tom's skin. How could they disrespect not just his possessions but the very sweat that built his life? With the tripwire set, Tom slipped back behind the hay bales. The intruders shifted closer to the entrance, oblivious to the trap that awaited them. It was then that he dug deep into the quiet strength in his heart. He would protect his home, where every blade of grass represented years of labor, every drop of sweat was a reminder of his commitment. It wasn't just about the barn, it was about honor, pride, and protecting his family's legacy. Now, Tom thought, finally ready. The voices stopped. A silence wrapped around them, drawn tight like a bowstring. Then chaos erupted. They turned, surprise flashing on their faces at his sudden intrusion. It was the moment Tom had waited for, the pause in their recklessness. Before they could respond, he made his move. He shoved the door open wide, stepping into the glow of moonlight. He roared, swinging the hoe like a sword. Their eyes widened, disbelief morphing to panic as they scrambled. One of the intruders, caught off guard, stumbled straight into Tom's tripwire. He fought to keep his balance but couldn't stop himself from toppling over, crashing to the ground. The other 2 hesitated, exchanging glances filled with uncertainty. They hadn't planned for resistance, hadn't prepared for the anger of a farmer protecting his turf. But fear has a way of hardening resolve, and one of them lunged forward with an angry snarl, desperate to redeem their lost confidence. Tom swung the hoe with everything he had, feeling power ignite through him. It struck the ground hard, the thud reverberating through the barn. The intruder paused, taken aback by the sheer determination standing before him. Tom's voice was steady and fierce as he declared, "You don't stand a chance here." The remaining two men hesitated, uncertainty clouding their judgment. They rushed to help their fallen companion, fumbling, chaotic. In that split second of their distraction, Tom lunged forward again, shoving them with the broad side of the hoe. The larger intruder stumbled back, catching a breath of fear amid their bravado. He shouted frantically as he turned and ran, dragging his companion back toward the barn door. The third man scrambled to regain his feet, fear etching lines of caution across his face. "Let's go," he yelled, desperation sharpened in his tone. And just like that, the tide turned. What began as an invasion had shifted into a retreat fueled by fear. They dashed through the barn entrance, a flurry of limbs crashing against the tripwire, tumbling like so many bowling pins onto the ground. Panic surged and they sprinted toward their waiting pickup, silhouetted like ghosts in the moonlight. Tom stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding, both fear and triumph roiling within him. They were gone. Just like that, they'd fled. It was surreal, almost as if he had imagined the whole confrontation. Peanut bounded up excitedly, barking with every ounce of energy in his old bones, tail wagging like a flag of victory. Tom knelt down, pulling the dog close, relief cascading over him like a cool summer rain. "We did it, buddy." Waves of adrenaline ebbed away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that settled in. But there was no time to rest. Tom could still feel the shadows of uncertainty lingering in the night. This wouldn't be the last time someone came looking for an easy score. He stepped outside, eyes scanning the darkened barnyard and the silent fields stretching out beyond. The faint glimmer of the pickup truck's lights faded into the distance, but Tom was no longer that naive farmer. He had faced danger head-on, and he felt a new flame ignite within him, a determination that wouldn't be easily extinguished. From that moment on, Tom immersed himself in preparation, determined that he wouldn't be caught off guard again. He spent the next few days reinforcing not just the barn, but the entire property. He checked locks, fortified doors, and even set up motion sensor lights along the driveway. He spoke to neighbors, others who shared the same concerns, who had been affected by the creeping shadows of insecurity. Together, they established a neighborhood watch, rallying around one another, exchanging strategies for safety. Tom led the charge with enthusiasm, feeling a sense of community blossom where once there had only been solitude. The farm became a fortress, a symbol of shared commitment. But within that fortress lay something more, strength forged in unity, a defiance against fear. Friends began to gather frequently, sharing dinners at his table, laughter mixing with conversation as they reinforced their bonds. Yet the shivers of that night lingered, ghostly reminders of what could happen if they let their guards down. Tom remained vigilant. He learned to listen, truly listen, to the sounds of the night. Each creak and rustle was no longer just nature. It was a narrative that demanded attention. Weeks turned into months, and slowly life returned to a routine rhythm. The shadows of fear dissipated with the dawning sun, a new day bringing hope with each fresh cup of coffee shared among friends. But the bond between the farmer and his land deepened, fortified by the understanding that threats don't always come in the form of invaders. Sometimes they come as whispers that sow doubt. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting hues of orange and pink across the sky, Tom found himself standing under the old oak tree near his barn, taking a moment to breathe it all in. The beauty of it all, the labor, the struggle, the triumphs. He was no longer just a lone farmer. He had grown into a pillar of his community, a protector of the land and those he loved. Peanut lay sprawled beside him, soaking up the warmth of the fading sunlight. With a sigh, Tom smiled at his old friend. In quiet response, Peanut lifted his head, tongue lolling out in a goofy grin as if to say every moment mattered. And he was right. Every challenge faced had woven a stronger fabric into the very essence of who Tom was, a farmer, a protector, and a man who refused to back down. Because tomorrow was always a new day, and those who dared to encroach upon his peace would find a resolve waiting to meet them at the gates. He was ready, a guardian of home, armed with the knowledge that love and determination could outshine even the darkest of nights. The night was alive with the symphony of crickets, a lullaby that wrapped around Maple Hill Farm, soothing all within its embrace. But inside the barn, a different kind of music played, a sharp, hollow clanging echoed like a drumbeat of chaos, rattling the tranquil night. Farmer Jack jolted awake in his small bedroom, the sudden sound pulling him from sleep like ice water. The old clock on the wall ticked ominously, counting down the seconds as adrenaline coursed through his veins. His heart raced with instinctive fear, the kind that comes when you know something isn't right. He slipped out of bed, heavy boots hitting the floor with a soft thud. Peanut, his loyal border collie, raised his head, ears perking up, sensing their shared urgency. Jack moved quietly, the familiar sights of his room settling in despite the panic bubbling within. This wasn't just any barn. It was the heart of his dreams, his family legacy built through sweat and toil. He wouldn't let anyone steal that away. As he made his way to the window, Jack pulled back the curtain, peering into the dark expanse of the barnyard. His gaze zeroed in on a faint glow flickering inside the barn. Shadows danced as figures moved about. The intruders were inside, ruthless and reckless, treating his life's work as nothing more than a scavenger hunt. Nothing stirred quite like the fire of anger that ignited in his chest. Jack knew he had to act fast, every second counted. He darted over to the small kitchen, grabbing the heavy metal flashlight from the countertop, its weight grounding him. Peanut followed closely, a low growl rumbling in his throat, matching the tightening knot in Jack's stomach. They both understood the stakes. The barn housed not just tools and equipment, but the essence of who he was as a farmer, and he'd be damned if he let these intruders take it. Jack crept to the side door of the barn, the cool metal of the handle familiar between his fingers. Outside, the night air hung thick with tension, and the sounds of clanging from inside the barn filled him with a mix of dread and determination. He paused, inhaling deeply, letting the crisp night air settle around him. The thought crossed his mind: what if they were armed? What if they were dangerous? But fear would not paralyze him. Peering through the crack in the barn door, Jack saw them. 3 men, all stocky and hardened, moving swiftly as they rummaged through hay bales and rusted tools. Their laughter spewed a sense of false bravado. They had no respect for what they were stealing. They were nothing but vultures waiting to tear apart what was left after a long day's fight. Jack's mind raced, weighing his options. Confront them? No, engaging would only invite chaos. But he needed a plan, one that played to his advantage. He slipped back into the shadows of the barn, the air thick with the smell of hay and wood. With every step, memories wove through his mind. Long days working the fields, late nights mending fences, the laughter of his children echoing in the background. This was not just land, it was his home. Spying a heavy wooden pitchfork in the corner, Jack knew it could serve 2 purposes: to defend and to distract. With a surge of determination, he grabbed it and moved toward the far end of the barn, positioning himself among the clutter of forgotten tools and old crates. Then he spotted the trapdoor leading to the loft above, where he kept supplies and old ropes. A plan took shape. If he could create a diversion, he could catch them off guard, create chaos in their ranks. He climbed quietly up the rickety stairs, each creak sending little fissures of anxiety through him. But he steadied himself. This barn held secrets, and he would use every single one of them. When he reached the loft, Jack steadied his breath, surveying the scene below. The intruders were now arguing about the tools, their voices rising in annoyance. One shouted. This was his moment. Jack hurriedly looked around, grabbing several old bags of feed filled with grain and strategically knocking them over. The sound echoed like rolling thunder, catching the intruders' attention. One of them asked, glancing nervously toward the source of the noise. They froze momentarily, the thrill of adrenaline dancing in the air. With a swift, calculated motion, Jack hurled a bag over the edge, watching it crash onto the barn floor, grain spilling in every direction. The flash of chaos was all he needed. The men scrambled as the grain cascaded down, choking the dust into clouds. They were disoriented, thrashing in confusion as they tried to grab what remained. Jack shouted, and the dog barked and rushed down the staircase, charging into the chaos with a fierce loyalty. The intruders had not anticipated a dog, let alone one as spirited as Peanut. Jack followed close behind as they stumbled back, their confidence shaken like a house of cards caught in a storm. The first man grasped for an old fence post, swinging wildly. Utilizing the chaos, Jack seized the moment. He yelled, charging forward with his pitchfork raised. The shock on their faces was palpable, their bravado eclipsed by the reality of facing a determined farmer. One of them yelled, scrambling toward the exit, fear clawing at their voices. Jack could see it. They had lost the fight. He lunged, a rhythmic pounding in his chest matching the adrenaline surging through him. As he swung the pitchfork towards the intruder, the man ducked, narrowly avoiding the strike that could have ended their ill-fated raid. Jack shouted, fury mingling with the thrill of defense. The remaining two turned to flee, their carefully laid plans crumbling under the weight of fear. Peanut, relentless, nipped at their heels, barking loudly, a whirlwind of fury and protection. They stumbled further back, hearts racing as they collided with one another, the clarity of their mistake dawning on them. In those frantic moments, Jack felt a rush of power. They were cornered, and the barn became their prison rather than his. Caught off guard by the fierce challenge presented before them, they had underestimated a farmer's resolve, and a dog's loyalty, a lesson none would forget. Jack commanded again, his voice echoing with authority as the first man crossed the threshold, blood racing for the door like water over rocks. They rushed toward their truck, fear lighting their faces as they scrambled into the vehicle. Jack's heart pounded as he followed, making sure they didn't regain their composure. The truck's tires shrieked against the gravel as they tore away, the night air filled with the sound of their retreat. Jack stood there, breathing heavy, the pitchfork trembling in his hand as the adrenaline began to wear off. He was filled with relief, triumph washing over him like a gentle tide. Peanut returned, tail wagging furiously, barking as if he had just conquered the fiercest of beasts. "We did it, boy," Jack said, kneeling down and ruffling the dog's ears, his heart swelling with pride. But even amid the victory, a simmering realization crept in. This was not just a singular confrontation. It had opened the door to the realities of the world, a reminder that threats could rise at any moment. In the days that followed, Jack sought ways to fortify his defenses. He gathered neighbors, sharing stories of their own encounters with danger, each tale etched with fear yet laced with camaraderie. Together, they decided to form a watch team, bolstering their safety as a community. Nightfall became a collective effort, a bond threaded through sharing not just stories, but strategies for survival. Jack spent hours reinforcing his barn door, installing better locks, and ensuring that every weak point was solidified with love and determination. But as the weeks turned into months, the scars of that night faded, optimism breathing life back into the farm. Jack felt the weight of duty settle on his shoulders but coupled it with the comfort of community. He understood that the barn represented more than just storage. It was where life would spring forth, where crops would grow, and children would play. It was on an unremarkable Tuesday morning, the sun pouring down in golden rays, that a sudden idea sparked in him. He had taught his children the value of preparing for the unexpected, and now it was time to pass those lessons on in a different way. That evening, as the sun sank low, casting a warm glow over the fields, he gathered everyone around in the barn. The kids wide-eyed and ready sat cross-legged in the hay, while friends leaned against the walls, curious. Jack stood at the front, his heart humming as he prepared to share a different kind of lesson. "Today," he began, voice steady yet warm, "I want to teach you about strength." With each tale spun, he wove stories of their community, of love and defense, lessons learned in the most unexpected ways. He intertwined the tales with laughter, creating a tapestry that would link generations together. He held up a small wooden box, a family heirloom that had been passed down for years. As the children listened, Jack felt a deep pride. This was more than teaching how to defend. It was about instilling unity, about being prepared together. The shadows of the past would not dictate their future. Rather, they would stand tall against whatever challenges came their way, fortified by shared experiences. In the months that followed, Maple Hill Farm thrived, not just through crops, but through the bonds that were created, the watchful nights that became less about fear and more about camaraderie. And as Jack stood in the barn one evening, feeling the warmth of the sunset wrap around him and the sound of Peanut's joyful barking return, he couldn't help but think of that night, where everything had changed. No longer did he just see a farm. It was a heart, a home, where together they would face the storms, come what may. The barn stood strong, just as he would, and that was a promise he was willing to keep, to fight for every inch, every moment, and every person that made this life their own. Because in a world of uncertainty, they had become a force of nature, fierce and unwavering. Through every challenge faced, Jack had discovered that love thrived in unity, and nothing, not even intruders, could tear apart what they had built. It was a moonless night on the edge of Maple Ridge, an expanse of farmland shrouded in darkness. The wind whispered through the tall corn stalks, a gentle rustling sound broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. But that calm was abruptly shattered by a loud crash echoing across the field, a sound that jolted Farmer Ethan from his sleep. His heart pounded as he swung his legs over the side of the bed. What was that noise? He could feel sweat creeping down his back as he quickly pulled on his old boots. As a seasoned farmer, he'd faced storms and the occasional wild animal, but this was different. Peanut, his faithful hound, sensed the disturbance too. The dog shot upright, baring his teeth and growling softly. "It's okay, boy," Ethan whispered, though his own voice trembled slightly. He crept down the wooden staircase, the floorboards creaking under his weight, an unsettling harmony with the low growl of Peanut by his side. There was no denying it now. The noise had come from the barn. It felt like an intruder's heartbeat pulsing through the night, each thud reverberating against Ethan's own. As he reached the door to the barn, Ethan paused for a moment, his breath catching. Panic surged within him, a mix of fear and righteous anger igniting a fire in his belly. This barn wasn't just a structure of wood and hay. It was the heart of his farm, the setting of countless memories, from the laughter of his children to the tender moments spent caring for the animals. It was his sanctuary. He cracked the door open and peered inside, the dim moonlight filtering through the slats illuminating chaotic movement within. 3 figures loomed, their voices muffled but unmistakably excited, whispering and laughing as they rummaged through his tools and equipment. They were in his barn, invading his space, and they weren't exactly quiet about it. Ethan's heart raced. Adrenaline surged through him, sharpening his instincts. He had to think fast. Rushing in would be reckless. He needed a plan. Gripping the door frame, he scanned the barn, searching for anything he could use. The darkness didn't deter him, it fueled his fight. Just then he caught sight of the old pitchfork leaning against the wall, a relic of simpler times but still effective if wielded with purpose. With purpose, Ethan pushed open the door further and crept inside, Peanut at his heels. The intruders were now knee-deep in his belongings, oblivious to the storm of resolve brewing behind them. He had to turn the tables. They had no idea who they were up against. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Ethan gave a low whistle. Peanut's ears perked up and the dog stood poised, prepared for action. The intruders whipped around, startled. For a brief moment, their surprise mingled with confusion. What the one of them started, but Ethan wasted no time. He charged forward, pitchfork raised high, a warrior defending his land. He bellowed, the words booming through the barn, resonating with authority. The intruders froze for a heartbeat, shock painted across their faces. Ethan felt a rush of power. They hadn't prepared for this. One of them, a burly figure with a scruffy beard, hesitated, glancing at his companions. "Just grab what you can." But the bravado was thin. Doubt flickered in the air like the light filtering through the gaps in the barn. Ethan warned, his voice steady and fierce. The pitchfork felt like an extension of himself. He could feel the strength surging through him, threading back to generations of farmers before him who had faced their own fears. The tension hung thick as the intruders exchanged glances. "Let's back off, man." Another called out, their confidence slowly crumbling. Ethan could see it, their minds racing, calculations playing out as they weighed their options. Knowing they were on the edge, Ethan seized the moment. "This is your last chance," he shouted, charging forward, pitchfork trembling in his grip. The approach sent them scrambling, adrenaline igniting their retreat. Peanut bolted forward, barking fiercely, a whirlwind of fur and loyalty. The sight of the dog only added to the chaos. it was more than they could handle. The one shouted, racing toward the barn door, panic edging his every move. Ethan took aim with the pitchfork more for show than harm, but it was enough to intimidate them. The barn door swung wide as the three stumbled through, colliding with one another in their frantic, chaotic rush to escape. The clatter was an orchestra of disorder as they sprinted toward their vehicle parked at the edge of the yard. But just as they reached the door of their worn-out truck, confusion tore through their ranks again. They were not prepared for what might come next. All they had intended was a quick score and a swift exit. Instead, they met the fierce resolve of a farmer safeguarding his life's work. Ethan yelled as he chased after them, pitchfork at the ready. The sight of him hunched over, glowing in the faint light gave them enough of a scare that they sped up even more, cornering like animals. The truck roared to life. Panic twisted in Ethan's stomach as he felt the weight of the moment. He had come so close to losing everything that mattered. He muttered, tightening his grip on the pitchfork. As they sped away, tires squealing against the gravel, a mix of relief and triumph washed over him. He had defended his home, but why had they come here in the first place? What else could he do to protect his land? A shadow crossed his mind, an unsettling sense of vulnerability. The adrenaline was fading now, replaced by an overwhelming heaviness in his chest. The barn, once a fortress of memories, now felt like a battlefield littered with remnants of the night's chaos. As the dust settled, both literally and metaphorically, Ethan realized he had a choice to make. Tomorrow would be about more than just securing his barn. It would mean fostering a sense of community, a network of support among the farmers. The world was changing. No longer could anyone stand alone against the tide. He remembered stories from his father, how they'd band together when trouble struck. Maybe now was the time to revisit that old-fashioned spirit. With a newfound resolve, Ethan began to check the barn, ensuring everything was secure. His heart raced as he moved through the space, but it wasn't out of fear anymore. Instead, it was a sense of purpose guiding him, a fire igniting his mind. Pushing the heavy doors shut, he locked them in place before making his way back to the house, Peanut trailing close behind, as if sensing the shift in energy. Once inside, he grabbed a pen and paper, determined to outline a plan, a strategy forged from the night's experience. That evening, he reached out to neighbors, those who shared the dust and toil of the land. He arranged a meeting, inviting them over for coffee and conversation, sharing stories, concerns, and laughter around the table. On that fateful night, they sat around his kitchen table, forging connections that felt essential. Together, they strategized, forming a neighborhood watch, a network that would keep each other safe. They shared tales of their own close encounters, of times they'd felt vulnerable and the impacts of isolation. There was a bond of understanding in the air, a collective strength that began to swell. The farmers understood. It was more than just about property. It was about life, legacy, and the fight for a future. In weeks that followed, they met regularly, checking in on each other's farms, remaining vigilant. The barn became a hub of unity, a space where they could cultivate not just crops but a shared resolve. They reinforced their properties, developed contingency plans, and fostered friendships that deepened with each gathering. Ethan noticed how, even when times grew tough, the spirit of camaraderie persevered. Conversations that began with safety grew into stories of their triumphs, laughter bubbling through the air like the bubbling brook on his property. Each meeting fortified the bond, and the looming threats felt just a little less intimidating when shared. As seasons changed and another moonlit night fell upon Maple Ridge, Ethan stood inside his barn, now a fortress polished by courage and community. Peanut lay at his feet, relaxed but ever watchful. The sound of laughter echoed from the farmhouse, reminders of the countless moments spent together with friends, neighbors who had become family. The world outside was unknowable. Threats could emerge at any moment. But within these walls, they had built a fortress of their own, a sanctuary forged from resilience, laughter, and love. And as he looked over the rows of neatly arranged tools, each one a reminder of labor and sweat, he couldn't help but smile. He had not only faced the fear but transformed it. Thanks to the bonds they'd formed, he felt a profound sense of hope. It wasn't the barn that defined their strength. It was the unity in the fight for what mattered most: family, friends, and home. They stood together, rooted and fierce, against whatever darkness lurked beyond the horizon. Now more than ever, he understood. It was not just about a pitchfork raised against intruders. It was about the unwavering spirit of a community settled together, ready as one to face whatever challenges life might bring. In that resilience, regardless of the storm outside, their light would always shine bright. The stillness of the night was shattered by a loud crash that echoed through the quiet fields of Maple Creek. Farmer Ben shot upright in bed, heart racing, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. He could hear the faint sound of metal clanging and anxious voices drifting through the darkness. Something was happening in the barn. He swung his legs over the edge of his bed, the floor cold against his feet. Peanut, his trusty border collie, was already alert, hackles raised and low growls rumbling deep in his chest. Together they made a formidable duo, ready to face whatever lurked in the shadows. Years of hard work had led to this moment, and Ben wasn't going to let anyone invade the sanctuary he had built. Inching to the window, he peered outside, the darkness revealing a flickering light inside the barn. Shadows flitted about three figures, their movements frantic as they rifled through his tools and supplies. Panic surged through Ben as the reality sunk in. Intruders had invaded the very heart of his life. He tiptoed to the kitchen, the familiar scent of old wood and cornmeal surrounding him. Grabbing an old crowbar from the utility shelf, he felt its weight in his hands. This was not just about defending his property. It was about defending every hour he had spent cultivating this land. The barn housed more than tools. It sheltered memories, family gatherings, the birth of livestock, late-night repairs. "Stay close, Peanut," he whispered, his voice steady despite the racing thoughts electrifying his mind. With quiet determination, he crept toward the barn, heart pounding in rhythm with the whispers spilling from inside. Just as he reached the entrance, he hesitated. The intruders were too caught up in their chaotic mission to notice him. Their voices suddenly drifted closer. "Grab that tractor battery," one shouted, his voice urgent and commanding. Ben could feel his pulse quickening. This wasn't just a petty theft. They were intent on doing real damage. He needed a plan. Ben remembered old stories about unexpected intruders. They typically saw themselves as untouchable, overestimating their bravado. He was going to turn the tables on them. Glancing quickly around, he spotted a stack of hay bales behind him. If he could create a diversion, he might just catch them off guard. He lowered the crowbar to the ground and silently climbed onto the bales, using their height to gain a better view of the chaos below. Peering through the barn door's gap, he observed the intruders. 3 men, rugged and weary, with an air of desperation permeating the barn. They were swinging tools around as if they were toys, with no respect for the hard work that had gone into each piece of equipment. Ben's blood boiled, an unwavering determination rising in him. With a swift motion, he grabbed an old lantern with a glass cover. The old barn was a maze of shadows, and he prepared to use that to his advantage. Ben tossed the lantern down toward them, its weight hitting the ground with a loud crash that shattered it. It startled them, and the glass rattled against the wooden floors, sending fearful glances around the barn. "Hey!" he roared, letting the volume of his voice echo. He jumped down from the bales, ready to confront them. "This is my land." The intruders froze, momentarily stunned, the surprise overshadowing their arrogance. His bravado was faltering, and Ben could smell their fear seeping through the bravado. Ben tightened his grip on the crowbar. "I'm the owner of this farm. You think you can just waltz in here and take what's mine?" He charged forward, pitchfork held high, the fierceness of his stance igniting something in the air. Peanut leaped forward at his side, barking fiercely, a whirlwind of protective fury. The intruders were taken by surprise, backing away slowly, eyes darting between Ben and the chaotic remnants of their intended haul. "This isn't worth it," muttered one of the men, scrambling to step back. But Ben wasn't about to let them escape that easily. "You think we're going to let you go after trying to rob us?" Swung the crowbar in front of him, a warning shot to show he meant business. Just as he stepped closer, one of the intruders lunged almost instinctively, swinging a wrench in desperation. Ben dodged just in time, feeling the rush of air as it missed him. In that split second, adrenaline kicked in and he swung the crowbar back, catching the man off balance. The other two turned to run, stumbling over the scattered tools and debris. The barn erupted in chaos, metal clanking, voices raised in panic. With a bark, Peanut barreled after the fleeing intruders, eager to protect his human and defend their home. The noise of panting and barking echoed in the barn, turning the entryway into a scene of utter confusion. Realizing their peril, the intruders raced toward the barn doors, panic palpable as they stumbled and fell over themselves in their frantic escape. Ben pressed forward, clutching the crowbar tightly, determined to prevent them from making it out. Out! He yelled with all the authority he could muster, each word filled with the weight of generations of farmers who'd fought for their land. But before he could reach them, the sound of tires screeching on gravel seeped into the air. Ben turned just in time to see their getaway vehicle bounding down the dirt path, engines roaring to life as they sped away. Relief washed over him like a wave, as if the barn itself exhaled for the first time in hours. The thrumming in Ben's chest began to settle. He lowered the crowbar, breathing heavily, disbelief washing over him. They had come to steal, to ruin the peaceful life he had built, and in the end they had run away at the sight of a devoted farmer. Peanut returned to his side, panting and wagging his tail, a trophy of loyalty worn on his scruffy coat. Ben sank onto a nearby hay bale, heart still racing, trembling with the thrill of combat and relief. "We did it, buddy." But even as they caught their breath, a new realization crept in. This wouldn't be the last time they faced danger. The night had been a wake-up call or a rude awakening, as the case might be. Farmers were increasingly vulnerable in a changing world, and Ben understood that his home needed more than just courage. It needed a plan. The following day, fueled by determination and a sense of urgency, he reached out to neighboring farms. Schedule an urgent meeting, share the details of the encounter. They needed to come together. In the days that followed, the local farmers gathered at Ben's barn, the spirit of community palpable as they shared coffee and stories. The room buzzed with energy, a mix of fear and camaraderie. "We can't let them get away with this," Ben said, his voice steady, fueled not only by the need for safety but by a sense of pride in their shared experiences. One by one they spoke up, sharing their close calls, experiences of loss, and even moments of vulnerability. Together they crafted a plan, a united front to protect their land, their legacies. They devised a communication network, built around trust and vigilance, determined to reinforce their community against any threats. Within weeks, they worked together to strengthen fences, install security lights, and each farmer created a broader watch plan, ensuring someone would always be on alert. They shared tools and resources, replenishing the strength of their community in the face of adversity. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the echoes of that night faded into a distant memory, but the lessons remained. The farmers grew closer, sharing meals around tables filled with laughter and stories of resilience. Ben felt these bonds strengthen him, knowing the shadows of fear would always be there, but now they served a purpose, a mission to protect their own. One cool autumn evening, as leaves began to swirl in the crisp air, Ben found himself standing under the vast canopy of stars, a cup of coffee warming his hands. The barn, once a site of chaos, now stood as a testament to their determination, a place where blood, sweat, and laughter had combined to create a spirit of unity. The future might remain uncertain, but Ben felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. He could face whatever the world threw at them because now it wasn't just about him. It was about community, about the shared purpose that etched its way into their hearts. He glanced down at Peanut, who looked up at him, stoic in his loyalty. He smiled. Peanut wagged his tail, sending a bolt of warmth through Ben as he took stock of everything around him. The land, the barn, the friendships forged through trials. They had fought back against darkness and come out stronger. That night had changed everything, igniting a fire that would surely fuel the future. And as the stars twinkled high above, he knew they were no longer just individual farms. They had become a formidable force, resilient against whatever challenges lay ahead. In a world filled with uncertainty, they stood together ready to face the storms alongside the warmth of community, secure in the knowledge that together they could withstand anything. The night was unusually quiet on the Johnson farm, a stark contrast to the usual symphony of crickets and owls. But then a loud crash echoed through the darkness, a sound that shattered the stillness and sent Farmer Jake's heart racing. He shot upright in bed, the sudden noise jolting him from sleep. Peanut, his faithful golden retriever, stirred beside him, ears perking up, low growls rumbling deep in his chest. Jake lay still for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A series of frantic sounds came from the barn, metal clanking and muffled voices laced with urgency. Intruders. Panic surged through him as adrenaline kicked in. He couldn't just sit there. All those years of hard work, of nurturing the land and building a life, could be at stake. He slipped out of bed, the cold wooden floor sending shivers through his feet as he grabbed a flashlight from the nightstand. The beam pierced the darkness as he turned it on, illuminating the small room filled with memories, old photographs, family mementos, and the remnants of a life built on sweat and perseverance. This was not just a farm, it was home. Peanut followed closely as they crept toward the front door, instincts sharp, ready for whatever lay ahead. With each step, the quiet of the outside world felt ominous, charged with the tension of the unknown. Jake's heart raced, pounding in his ears as he approached the barn, its silhouette looming large against the starless sky. Just as he reached the door, he paused, taking a deep breath. Inside, shadows moved chaotically, the intruders apparently unaware that their actions were about to receive severe consequences. He peered through the crack in the door, trying to make out the chaos within. 3 figures, mostly obscured by darkness, were rifling through his tools, tossing them aside like yesterday's trash. The largest of the men held a crowbar, swinging it carelessly, showing a complete disregard for what they were stealing. Fear simmered beneath Jake's skin. Hard work and long days were being violated. Moments passed, but those moments felt like hours. He knew he needed a plan. Confronting them straight away might lead to violence, something he wanted to avoid. Instead, Jake decided to use his knowledge of the barn to his advantage. Farmers know their land, and he was a farmer through and through. Jake stepped back, trying to think quickly. What could he do? Just then, a strategy took shape in his mind. He crept silently around to the back of the barn, his heart pounding as he searched for anything he could use. The moon was hidden behind clouds, granting him the cloak of darkness he desperately needed. There it was, the old hayloft. He could jump up there, throw something down to create a distraction, and let the chaos work in his favor. With Peanut close at his heels, he climbed the ladder, every creak echoing loudly in the night. The view from the loft showed him an intimate look at the intruders, silhouetted against the light they had created with their crude lantern. They chatted casually, as if it were an ordinary night. "Grab that old tractor battery," one of them shouted, a gleam in his eye, desperation mixed with excitement spilling from every word. Anger ignited within Jake. These thieves were treating his life's work as if it were merely a game. With a quick glance around the loft, he located some old tools and equipment, a rusty hammer, some empty feed bags, and a loose rope. It would have to do. He grabbed the rope and quietly pulled it to the edge of the loft, lowering it until he reached the ground. Then, Jake took a deep breath and let something heavy, a hammer, drop straight onto the ground below. The clang echoed like a thunderclap, reverberating through the barn. One of the intruders exclaimed, eyes widening as they whipped around, startled by the noise. "Well, what are you waiting for?" Another shot back, his bravado crumbling slightly. An opportunity. Jake recognized the hesitation now, each of them frozen, grappling with whether to press on or investigate the noise. They were vulnerable, and he needed to seize the moment. Jake shouted from the loft, his voice booming, filled with an authority usually reserved for handling livestock. Peanut responded with an urgent bark, scrambling to the side of the barn. The intruders were paralyzed, staring wide-eyed at the source of the commotion. Jake yelled, suddenly springing down from the loft. The pitchfork that had once leaned against the wall was now firmly in his grip. The last warning had ripened the air around them, an ultimatum. The men scrambled back, shock written on their faces, their bravado drained in mere seconds. The leader gasped, glancing at his 2 companions. The trust among them was beginning to fray, The fear in Jake's eyes was far from invisible. "We should go, man," one whispered, fear creeping into their voice. But before they could retreat fully, Jake could see something more in their eyes, panic mixed with stubbornness. They might not flee just yet. He could feel the tension spike like static in the air, the moment stretching as they contemplated their next move. With calculated precision, Jake swung the pitchfork, aiming at the floor next to them, causing them to jump in surprise. "You have 5 seconds before I call the cops," he growled, letting the strength of his voice resonate in the walls of the barn. Every second felt like an eternity. Jake's heart raced as they faltered, a brief flash of hesitation giving him a window of opportunity. One man swung a wrench wildly, aiming for Jake's head. Jake ducked just in time, adrenaline pulsing as he shoved forward. The barn erupted into chaos. Ben could feel the heat of panic hanging in the air as the intruders scrambled for exit, colliding with one another as they tried to escape the wrath of an angry farmer. The darkness was swirling around them, souls terrified of being caught in a lie, caught in a bad decision. One of them stumbled into a pile of hay bales, sending a cloud of dust billowing into the air, and that chaos only fueled Jake's resolve. "Get out!" he roared again, swiping at them with the pitchfork. The remaining two glanced at each other, fear evident as they turned and bolted toward the barn door. "We're leaving," the leader shouted hotly but with a quiver in his voice, but Jake had already had enough. He surged forward, channeling every ounce of determination into that final push, planting his feet firmly. He swung the pitchfork once more, just as they reached the door. With a loud crash, the pitchfork struck the floorboards beside them. They scattered like leaves caught in a storm, tumbling through the threshold into the cool night air, their escape frantic and foolish. Jake's heart hammered as he moved closer to the door, peeking outside. The trio was scrambling to get into their old pickup truck, tires swinging and screeching against the gravel as they fled into the distance. A sigh of relief pulled through him, but the tension still resided deep in his gut. True, they had escaped, but the shadows of that encounter lingered ominously, leaving doubt in their wake. Turning back to the barn, he took a moment to gather himself. The adrenaline coursing through his veins began to fade, replaced with the weight of realization. This wasn't just a simple robbery, it was a call to arms. He had narrowly defended not just his barn, but everything it represented. But as he surveyed the chaos inside, the tools strewn about, the hay scattered like confetti after a storm, he knew he couldn't merely repair the damage. This was a critical turning point. They were no longer just farmers, they were a target, and targets could be hit more than once. Jake took a deep breath, heart still racing. He knew he needed to devise a plan. He could fortify the barn, sure, but what about the land? What about his family? What if those intruders returned? As those thoughts spiraled through his mind, urgency was replaced by fear. They could come back, driven by desperation, armed with ideas of their own. He needed to act fast. Jake moved purposefully through the wreckage, picking up scattered items as he replayed the events in his mind. The intruders had a plan. If he was going to protect his everything, he needed a plan of his own. The sun began to rise, casting warm orange light through the barn doors and illuminating the remnants of the night's chaos. The morning air hung heavy with unspoken threats, and he felt it weighing on him. Jake pulled out his phone and quickly texted his neighbors, urging them to meet him later that day. They were in it together, and they needed to band together. After all, they lived in a world where it seemed the light was fading. They needed to be watchful, vigilant, ready. As day turned to dusk, the sun sank low, casting orange and purple hues over the horizon. Ben set about gathering supplies, determined to fortify his barn. He grabbed wood, nails, and anything else he could use to reinforce the doors and windows. There was a necessity behind each hammer strike as he created barriers against the unforeseen danger lurking beyond. Each thud echoed assurances in his heart. They were farmers, they worked the land, and a storm would never deter their spirit. But even as he labored away, a sliver of unease wormed its way into his heart. What if those intruders returned? What if they had friends with malicious intent? As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake noticed something lurking in the distance, 3 dark silhouettes creeping back toward the barn. They were back. His heart raced again, the rise of dread merging with resolve. It was now or never. He felt the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. A choice lay before him. Did he stand his ground or prepare to fight again? With pitchfork in hand and Jake's guard raised, he took a deep breath. What would unfold next would reveal whether he was merely a farmer or also a protector, ready to face whatever darkness dared encroach upon his land.